My name is Olivia Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and 3 months ago, I was the kind of woman business magazines like to call self-made. I had built my company from a folding table in my garage into an 8-figure brand people in Seattle actually respected. I had a beautiful apartment, a daughter who thought I could fix anything, and just enough pride to believe that if I worked harder than everyone else, life would eventually play fair. I was wrong. The night my mother cut me out of her life, I was sitting in the front seat of my SUV with my daughter asleep in the back, wrapped in 2 thin blankets and burning with fever. My phone lit up with a message so cold it made the whole car feel smaller. She told me I was no longer her daughter. By sunrise, my accounts were locked. My company was collapsing under accusations I knew were manufactured, and the same family name that used to open doors for me was suddenly being used to slam every one of them shut. I kept telling myself I had hit bottom. Then the hospital turned my sick child away because my card declined. Then the rain started hitting the windshield so hard I could barely hear myself think. Then a black Rolls-Royce pulled up beside my car, and a stranger stepped out like she had been sent from some world that no longer belonged to me. She said a dying billionaire had spent years looking for the woman who saved his life, and somehow, that woman was me. I thought she had the wrong car, the wrong night, the wrong broken woman. I had no idea that before the people who erased me saw me again, my whole family would freeze the second I walked back into their world. Before I tell you what happened after that Rolls-Royce stopped beside my window, tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from, because I have a feeling this story is going to travel farther than I ever did. For 6 weeks, I kept telling myself the collapse had to be a misunderstanding. My company, EcoNest Home, did not fall apart because customers stopped loving it. It fell apart because somebody reached into its bloodstream and started cutting one artery at a time. First, a regional retail chain put our launch on hold after receiving anonymous documents claiming our bamboo storage line came from uncertified factories overseas. Then, our payment processor froze nearly every dollar from our online sales while they reviewed a wave of suspicious chargebacks that all hit within 48 hours. Then, our warehouse landlord changed the locks after the bank called our line of credit. It was too coordinated to be random, too clean to be bad luck. I had built EcoNest from a folding table, 2 borrowed shelves, and a belief that ordinary products could be made better without lying to people. We sold refillable soaps, low-waste kitchen goods, organic bedding, simple things, but honest things. That honesty was the part I was proudest of. It was also, I learned too late, the thing that made me dangerous to the wrong people. A week before everything imploded, I found an invoice trail that made no sense. One of our biggest raw material vendors had a side contract with a shell nonprofit that was quietly tied to my family's foundation. When I pushed for answers, meetings got canceled. People stopped returning calls. Then my older sister Isabella offered to help. She said she could talk to the right people, calm donors down, smooth over whatever rumor was spreading. I believed her because for most of my life, I wanted to believe the best about my family more than I wanted the truth. 2 days later, one of my biggest customers forwarded me a private email they had received from Isabella. It warned them that doing business with EcoNest might expose them to reputational harm and supply chain fraud. She signed it as a concerned advisor protecting the Bennett name. I remember staring at the screen and feeling something in me go physically cold. When I confronted her, she did not even deny it. She said I had become reckless, stubborn, embarrassing. She said I was dragging the family into a scandal I was too naive to survive. I drove straight to my mother's house that night. Not to fight. Not even to beg for money. I just wanted one person in my family to say this had gone too far. She made me wait in her sitting room for 20 minutes, then walked in dressed for dinner like I was an inconvenience between courses. I told her Isabella had been undermining my business. I told her the accusations against EcoNest were manufactured. I told her Emma and I were going to lose everything if somebody did not stop this. My mother listened with the kind of face rich women perfect over years of charity luncheons and silent contempt. Then she said, "Olivia, when a house catches fire, you do not argue with the smoke. You step away before it stains you." I asked her if she was really going to stand there and let her daughters destroy each other. She looked me in the eye and said, "No, Olivia. One daughter is protecting this family. The other one chose to make herself disposable." That was the moment I understood I had never been standing outside the problem. I had been standing in the middle of it. By the end of that week, my apartment lease was gone, my business accounts were frozen, my investors vanished, and my mother released a polished little statement through the family foundation saying the Bennett family had no connection to my business decisions and would not be commenting further. I sold my dining table, then my camera, then 2 bracelets my grandmother left me. Emma thought we were downsizing for an adventure. She was 7, bright and gentle, with the kind of trust that makes you want to become a better person just so you deserve it. I put us in a cheap motel first. When that money ran out, I folded the back seats of my SUV down flat and told her we were camping in the city. During the day, we hid in the Seattle Public Library, where she read picture books and drew houses with flower boxes while I applied for jobs that never called back. At night, we parked in the corner of a Walmart lot and shared peanut butter sandwiches under a weak dome light. Emma called the SUV our spaceship. I called it temporary because I could not let myself call it home. On the last day before everything changed, I counted the money in my wallet 3 times. $27. That was all I had left. Emma was coughing by then, a rough little cough that sounded too big for her body. She tried to smile through it and said she was okay. Children lie like that when they love you. That night, when I touched her forehead and felt heat roll off her skin, I realized I was out of time. The storm came in hard off the water, one of those cold Seattle nights when the rain does not fall so much as a tack. Emma was curled in the back of the SUV with her rabbit tucked under her chin, shivering even though her skin was burning. Her breathing had changed. It was shallow and fast, with a wet little catch at the end that made panic rise in me so fast it felt like choking. I threw the car into drive and headed for the nearest emergency room, running lights I would have stopped for any other night. I kept talking to her through the rearview mirror the whole way. "Stay with me, baby. We are almost there. Mom's got you." I must have said it 50 times, maybe because I needed one of us to believe it. The ER was bright and crowded and cruel in the way exhausted places become. A triage nurse took one look at Emma and called for a room. For 10 beautiful seconds, I thought we were safe. A resident listened to her lungs, ordered oxygen, said the word pneumonia, and told me they needed to admit her. Then I was sent to admissions. The woman behind the glass asked for insurance. I said I did not have active coverage. She asked for a deposit. I gave her my debit card. The machine beeped once, then again. Declined. She tried a second time with the same careful, detached expression people use when they do not want your bad luck to touch them. Declined. I told her my daughter was 7 years old and struggling to breathe. I told her they already said she needed to stay. The woman lowered her voice and slid a paper estimate under the glass like she was doing me a kindness. I do not remember the exact number because after 4 digits, my brain stopped treating it like money and started treating it like a wall. They offered to write prescriptions and discharge her. Discharge her. In the middle of a storm. In the middle of a fever. Into the front seat of a car that smelled like damp blankets and fear. I went back to the room in a kind of trance. A nurse with tired eyes removed the oxygen clip from Emma's finger and whispered that she was sorry. Sorry is the loneliest word in the world when you are poor and your child is sick. I carried Emma back through the automatic doors, rain blowing sideways into my face, and laid her down in the SUV again. I gave her the last of the liquid fever medicine I had bought at a convenience store, and sat in the driver's seat gripping the wheel so hard my palms hurt. I did not cry gracefully. I broke open. I put my forehead on the steering wheel and begged the universe not to take my daughter because I had already run out of things to trade. I think I had just decided I was going to drive to my mother's house and make a scene on her front lawn when headlights cut through the rain beside me. A long black Rolls-Royce pulled into the empty space next to my SUV, so polished it looked unreal under the hospital lights. At first I thought security had finally decided I looked too pathetic to leave alone. Then the rear passenger door opened and a woman stepped out in a dark coat that probably cost more than my first month's rent ever had. She came to my window and tapped once. Not aggressive, not timid, certain. I lowered the glass an inch. Rain sprayed in. She leaned down and said, "Miss Olivia Bennett?" I stared at her. She was in her 50s, elegant in a severe way, with silver hair pinned neatly back and eyes that looked like they had seen every kind of disaster and did not scare easy. She said, "My name is Margaret Hale. I represent Mr. Theodore Grant. He has been trying to find you for 10 years. I honestly thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion." I told her she had the wrong person. She said, "10 years ago on the Aurora Bridge, a sedan went through the rail in the rain and tipped into the water below. You climbed down after it. You pulled the driver halfway through the broken window before first responders got there. You left before anyone could take your name. Do you remember now?" And I did. I remembered icy water, shattered glass, my knees slipping on wet concrete, and a man bleeding into the collar of an expensive coat while I screamed at him to stay awake. I had been 22, driving home from a double shift and too young to realize people in luxury cars did not usually die anonymously. I saved him because he was there. Then I left because I had no idea who he was, and no reason to think my life would ever intersect with his again. Margaret must have seen recognition hit my face because her voice softened just a little. "Mr. Grant is dying," she said. "He is very sick, and he learned your identity only recently. He asked for you specifically." Then she glanced toward the back seat and saw Emma, flushed and barely conscious under my coat. Her expression changed. "Is that your daughter?" I nodded. Margaret did not waste another second. "Mr. Grant has a private medical suite and a physician on site. If you follow me now, your daughter can be treated before we discuss anything else." Every instinct told me not to trust miracles that arrived in luxury cars. Every maternal instinct told me Emma did not have another night for my pride to sort itself out. So I followed the Rolls-Royce through the rain, across dark winding roads I barely recognized, all the way to a gated property on a ridge above the city. The house was not flashy. It was worse. It was the kind of quiet wealth that never needs to announce itself. Stone, glass, cedar, warm lights, perfect silence. Before I had fully parked, a doctor and 2 nurses were already at my back door. They lifted Emma from the SUV with practiced speed, while a white-haired physician introduced himself as Dr. Samuel Reeves and listened to her chest right there under the covered drive. "Severe pneumonia," he said. "She needs oxygen and IV antibiotics immediately." They moved her into the house and into a private medical wing so efficient it made the hospital feel like theater. No one asked me for a card. No one slid a form under glass. They just treated my child. I stood by Emma's bed in wet clothes and watched the oxygen number on the monitor crawl up, 90, 92, 95, until I had to grab the rail because relief hit me so hard my legs stopped feeling like mine. Margaret touched my arm then and said, "Mr. Grant is awake. He would like to thank you himself." I looked through the glass at my daughter sleeping under clean white blankets with color slowly returning to her face, and for the first time in months I stepped away from her bed, without feeling like the world would punish me for it. Theodore Grant's room felt less like a bedroom and more like a command center somebody had softened at the edges because death was close. There were medical monitors near the bed, but also shelves of shipping models, framed route maps, leather ledgers, and a giant wall of windows that looked out over black water and distant city lights. He was thinner than any man with a voice like his should have been. Cancer had hollowed him out, but it had not made him weak in the eyes. They were alert, pale, and strangely amused when he saw me, as if he had spent a long time imagining the end of a story and was relieved to discover it finally had one. He asked me to sit. His voice was rough but direct. "I remember the water," he said. "I remember your hand hitting the glass and your face looking furious that I was making your night harder." It startled a laugh out of me, which felt almost wrong after the months I had had. He said that after the accident, he hired people to find the young woman who saved him. They never managed it. "You vanished," he said. "You did a great thing and then disappeared back into ordinary life, which made you nearly impossible to track in a world full of people desperate to be noticed. A few months ago, one of my attorneys flagged your name in a business filing. I started reading. The more I read, the less I believed your collapse was accidental." I did not say much. I was tired, suspicious, grateful, ashamed, all at once. Theodore seemed to understand that. He did not push. He asked about Emma first, and when I told him she was stabilizing, he closed his eyes in visible relief. Then he asked about EcoNest. I told him the short version. The invoices that did not add up. The pressure from my sister. The silence from my mother. The chargebacks. The frozen funds. The whisper campaign. The part I did not tell him directly, though I suspect he already knew, was that my family had not just stepped back when I needed them. They had stepped on my hands while I was trying not to drown. Theodore listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "There is an old myth that powerful families survive because they are loyal. They survive because they know when to sacrifice one of their own to keep the table clean. I know that breed of people." He looked toward the windows then, like a man measuring years instead of distance. "I built Grant Dynamics from 3 trucks and a rented loading dock. Now it moves freight across the entire West Coast. People think empires are built from vision. They are built from appetite. Mine included. I made mistakes, Olivia. But I never confused appetite with virtue." He asked Margaret to bring a file. It was slim. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to be alarming. He told me he had people quietly look into the pattern around EcoNest after he recognized my name. The deeper they looked, the more often one entity surfaced near the edges of questionable vendor contracts, donor pressure campaigns, and Shell consulting invoices. Bennett Family Foundation. My stomach dropped. I asked him if he was sure. He said the words carefully, the way you speak when truth will hurt more if you rush it. "I am sure enough to tell you not to trust coincidence anymore." Theodore died 4 days later, just before sunrise. I had read to him the night before from one of his own shipping memoirs because he said hearing logistics spoken aloud soothed him more than prayer ever had. Emma was breathing normally by then, sitting up in bed, drawing little cranes and boats for the nurses. His death should not have hit me the way it did. I had known him for less than a week. But grief does not always measure time. Sometimes it measures recognition. He was the first powerful person in months who looked at me and did not see a cautionary tale or an embarrassment or a woman one bad quarter away from being disposable. He saw me clearly, and then he was gone. 2 days after the funeral, Margaret drove me and Emma into the city for the reading of the will. The law offices sat high above Elliott Bay in a tower of steel and glass. The conference room was severe and quiet. Theodore's attorney, Harold Whitmore, was the kind of man who had probably built entire lives in 6-minute increments. He did not waste words. After several smaller bequests to staff, charities, and former colleagues, he folded his hands and looked directly at me. To Olivia Bennet, he said, the woman who once pulled Theodore Grant from freezing water and who, in his words, still remembers the difference between being tested and being bought, Theodore leaves the controlling 68% stake in Grant Dynamics, Grant Ridge Estate, the majority of his private liquid portfolio, and full authority over his charitable restructuring directives. For a second, I thought I had misunderstood English as a language. I remember turning to Margaret because she was the only person in the room whose face was remotely human. She gave me one small nod. Harold then handed me a second sealed packet Theodore had left with explicit instructions. I opened it in the car on the way back to the estate because my hands would not stop shaking until I did. Inside was a letter and a bound investigative file. Theodore's letter was short, which made it worse. He said he was not leaving me a reward. He was leaving me a burden he believed I might carry honestly. He wrote that the file contained evidence that Eleanor Bennet and Isabella Bennet Cross had used the family foundation for years as a laundering channel for personal expenditures, fraudulent consulting fees, illegal transfers, and pressure tactics against businesses that would not cooperate with them. He wrote that when Econest refused to funnel contracts through their preferred network, and when I started asking questions, they did not just abandon me. They helped destroy me. I sat in the back seat with that letter in my hand while the city blurred outside the window and Emma slept against my shoulder, healthy for the first time in days. The inheritance was overwhelming. The money was unreal. But it was the file that changed the air around me. My mother and sister had not merely chosen reputation over me, they had chosen fraud, cruelty, and strategy. They had made me the price of keeping their machine quiet. By the time we reached Grant Ridge, I understood one thing with absolute clarity. I had not been rescued. I had been handed a weapon, and Theodore Grant, even in death, had trusted me to decide whether justice and mercy could still exist in the same room. 2.5 weeks later, Seattle's most self-congratulatory charity gala took over the ballroom of the Fairmont, all crystal glasses and practiced compassion. The Bennett Family Foundation had sponsored that event for years. My mother loved that room because everyone in it understood the cost of pretending to be decent. I almost did not go. Then I realized not going would still be a form of fear, and I was done letting my life be organized around other people's comfort. So I went. Grant's stylists found me a black dress that fit like certainty. Emma wore a dark blue dress with little silver flowers at the hem and patent shoes she could not stop admiring. Margaret came with us only as far as the entrance, then squeezed my hand once and said, "Whatever happens in there, remember who had to crawl and who had to wait for the elevator." It made me smile when I needed it most. The ballroom fell quiet in that subtle way expensive rooms do, where the silence is mostly made of people pretending they are not staring. I walked in with Emma's small hand in mine, and there they were. My mother near the donor wall in ivory silk, my sister beside her in red, one hand balanced on the stem of a champagne flute like even gravity owed her respect. They saw me at the same time. And for 5 full seconds, neither one of them moved. I counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My mother's face drained first. Isabella's expression did something stranger. It did not look like shock. It looked like insult, as if my return itself were rude. Then training kicked in. My mother smiled. My sister smiled. They crossed the room toward us wearing warmth like rented jewelry. "Olivia," my mother said, with that breathy note she used in public when she wanted to sound maternal without committing to anything real. "Emma, sweetheart, look at you." Isabella crouched like she had been thinking about my daughter every day instead of leaving us to sleep in a car. She said, "You look so grown up." I had to stop Emma from instinctively stepping closer to me. Children remember cold better than adults expect. My mother took my elbow gently, as if we were two women reuniting after a harmless misunderstanding. Olivia, we should talk privately. There has clearly been a terrible series of misunderstandings. Misunderstandings, I repeated, because some words deserve the disrespect of being said back. Isabella leaned in and lowered her voice. We know about Theodore Grant. Everyone does by now. It is all very sudden, and Mother and I just want to make sure you are protected from the kind of people who will use you. I almost admired how quickly she repositioned herself from executioner to advisor. My mother added that family should handle family matters quietly and with dignity. She said Emma should not be dragged through instability. She said if I needed help managing my new responsibilities, we could rebuild trust and make sensible arrangements. Sensible arrangements. That was the phrase. What she meant was, sign something, share something, hand over enough so we can feel secure again. I looked around the ballroom. Half the city's social class was pretending not to listen. A local councilwoman had gone very still by the auction display. Two men from an investment firm were openly watching us over their drinks. They all knew something was wrong. They just did not know the shape of it yet. My mother reached toward Emma then, perhaps thinking the safest way back into my life was through the only soft part still visible. Emma pulled her hand away before I had to say a word. I will remember that forever. The fake warmth in my mother's face flickered. Isabella recovered first and smiled harder. Olivia, she said through her teeth, we are offering grace. I said, no, you are offering access. There is a difference. She straightened. My mother's voice cooled by half a degree. Be careful, Olivia. New money disappears faster than old problems. I should have walked away then, but the months in the SUV, the hospital, the way Emma coughed under two damp blankets, all of it rose in me at once. So I said the one thing I knew would cut through every listener in that room. Interesting, I said. Neither of you remembered we were family when my daughter had pneumonia in the back of a car. The silence that followed was not subtle. It was physical. My mother's face went rigid. Isabella actually glanced around to see who had heard. The answer was nearly everyone. A donor near the stage looked down at his glass like it had become suddenly fascinating. Someone at the far bar whispered, "Oh my God." That was the moment the power shifted. Not fully, not yet, but enough for them to feel it. My mother regrouped and told me this conversation was not over. Isabella hissed that I was making a mistake. I bent down to Emma's height and asked if she wanted dessert from the pastry table. She nodded immediately. Then I looked back at my family and said, "This conversation ended when you chose a statement over your own granddaughter. Enjoy the gala." Emma and I walked away, leaving them standing in the center of the room with their smiles finally broken. Later that night, after we were home and Emma was asleep under a thick white comforter in a room bigger than our old motel, she asked me one quiet question. Why was Grandma acting nice if she does not like us? I sat on the edge of her bed and told her the gentlest truth I could. Some people do not love. They negotiate. Emma thought about that for a second and said, I do not want to be like that. I kissed her forehead and told her that was the best promise either of us could make. They moved faster after the gala because humiliation is gasoline for people like my mother and sister. Within 48 hours, a glossy little article appeared online implying I had manipulated a dying man during his final days. Isabella reposted it with a caption about the importance of due diligence and emotional fraud. A week after that, my mother's attorneys filed a petition requesting visitation rights with Emma based on what they called concern over my sudden instability, recent homelessness, and exposure to undue influence after a traumatic financial collapse. They were not trying to win custody. They were trying to frighten me, to remind me that even now, With all Theodore had left me, they still believed they could reach into my life and shake it until I dropped something valuable. What they did not know was that I had stopped reacting like the daughter they raised. I had started reacting like the woman who survived them. While they were feeding rumors to bloggers and threatening court actions, Harold Whitmore had already retained a forensic accountant. Theodore's file had been enough to open doors, but not enough by itself to close a case. Victor Lane, the accountant, moved through ledgers and shell companies like a surgeon. He found money from the Bennett Family Foundation routed through consulting firms that existed mostly on paper, then looped back into a real estate holding company tied to Isabella's husband. He found donor-restricted funds used to renovate a vacation property in Sun Valley. He found invoices for sustainability outreach that corresponded almost perfectly to the pressure campaign that killed EcoNest. The cruelest part was how petty some of it was. They did not just wreck my company to protect some grand empire. They did it to keep several profitable little lies intact. I let the legal machinery move quietly while I agreed to meet them. My mother requested a private conversation at the family's downtown office, the same place where I used to wait after school while she finished board meetings. I told Harold I would go, but only if he arranged for the room to be lawfully monitored from the adjoining conference suite. He did. Isabella arrived first, sharp and furious in cream wool, pacing before my mother even entered. Eleanor came in second, composed as ever, like civility itself had been invented to disguise threats. There were no hugs this time, no performance. My mother opened with the familiar script. She said the press was getting ugly and Emma deserved peace. She said the family could set up a private trust for me if I would cooperate and avoid unnecessary public conflict. I asked what cooperation meant. Isabella answered before my mother could. She said, "Stop pretending you earned any of this. Sign over a controlling share in Grant Dynamics to an outside management vehicle we approve. Close down whatever nonsense your lawyers are digging through, and make a statement that the family misunderstandings were caused by stress." She said misunderstandings the way other people say pest control. I asked if this was the same kind of misunderstanding that sent chargebacks into my company accounts and donor calls into my investors. My sister went very still, then laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Olivia," she said, "EcoNest was never going to survive. You were too sentimental to scale. All we did was speed up what was already true." My mother cut in and told her not to be careless, but the damage was done. I leaned back and asked whether it had also been a misunderstanding when they kept Emma and me outside the family home. My mother's face remained unreadable. She said, "When one child becomes a liability, a mother has a duty to protect the structure that feeds everyone else." There it was. Not denial, not even apology. Just philosophy. Cold, complete, and spoken in the same tone other women use to discuss table settings. Isabella leaned forward then and played the last card she thought she had. She said that if I forced this fight, old records of my homelessness would surface in court, and every ugly day Emma spent in that SUV would become a weapon. She said judges cared about stability, not feelings. She said maybe I should think about whether I wanted my daughter interviewed by child welfare investigators. I wish I could say I stayed calm because I am noble. The truth is, I stayed calm because anger had finally become expensive and precision had become useful. So I looked at my sister and said, "You really think I am still the woman who came here for mercy?" She did not answer. She did not need to. Her eyes did. The meeting ended with my mother telling me that families survive by closing ranks. I told her some families survive by eating their own. When I walked out, Harold was waiting in the adjoining room with Victor and an assistant district attorney from King County's Financial Crimes Unit. Every word had been captured. Every threat. Every admission. The petition for visitation was withdrawn 3 days later, probably because their lawyers suddenly understood they had bigger fires to worry about. Then the first subpoena landed. then the second. Then IRS Criminal Investigation requested records. The Bennett Foundation Board held an emergency meeting and 2 members resigned before sunset. Isabella called me 17 times in one day and left 3 voicemails that went from furious to frightened to vicious again. My mother never called. She sent one text that simply said, "You are confusing revenge with justice." I stared at it for a long time before I replied. "No, I learned the difference from you." The following Friday, agents arrived at the Foundation's office just after 9 in the morning. By noon, local outlets were reporting an active financial probe into charitable fund diversion and laundering. By evening, a photograph of Isabella leaving the building in dark sunglasses and a blazer thrown over her shoulders was all over Seattle. The city loves rich women in distress almost as much as it loves seeing them exposed. But even then, it was not enough for me that they were afraid. I wanted them to understand loss the way they had assigned it to me. Not poverty, not cruelty, consequence. The arrests happened on a gray Monday that smelled like wet pavement and espresso. I was in the Grant Dynamics boardroom reviewing a shipping compliance overhaul when Harold's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, then at me, and all he said was, "It has begun." My mother was taken from the Foundation townhouse just after dawn. Isabella was arrested outside her brokerage office while 2 junior agents were setting out bottled water for a luxury property presentation. According to the affidavit, they were charged with wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering, obstruction, and conspiracy. The number that made the headlines was $14.2 million, because people understand greed better when it comes with digits. The detail that mattered more to me was buried lower in the article. Part of the money trail overlapped with the targeted destruction of EcoNest through fraudulent consulting fees and coercive pressure on vendors and lenders. In other words, they had not only stolen from strangers, they had used theft to sharpen the knife they put in my back. The case moved quickly because money cases do when the paperwork is good, and the defendants are arrogant enough to believe deleting emails counts as strategy. Victor Lane's audit was devastating. Former employees from the Foundation rolled over one by one. Isabella's husband saved himself by cooperating early, which I am sure she took as the final insult. At the pre-trial hearing, my mother wore navy and pearls and tried to look like American restraint personified. My sister looked younger without makeup and meaner without an audience. They both turned when I entered. Neither expected me to be there with Emma. I did not bring her into the courtroom, of course. Margaret waited with her outside, in a private conference lounge with coloring books and snacks. But I wanted them to know I no longer had to choose between telling the truth and protecting my daughter. I could do both. When I testified, I did not perform. I did not cry. I explained the business timeline, the donor pressure, the frozen accounts, the shell invoices, the statements they made in that monitored office. I described the night Emma got sick in the back of the SUV, not because I needed pity, but because harm should be measured where it lands. My mother watched me the whole time with an expression I still cannot fully name. It was not remorse. It was shock that I had stopped arranging myself around her comfort. Isabella looked furious until the prosecution played the recording. Then she went pale. Hearing your own voice explaining away somebody else's destruction has a way of stripping glamour from a person. The convictions came 6 weeks later. Guilty on the major counts. Restitution in the millions. Assets frozen. The Bennett Family Foundation dissolved under court supervision. Isabella lost her real estate license before sentencing even finished processing through the state board. The judge, a woman old enough to be unimpressed by pedigree, said from the bench that charity used as camouflage for greed is still greed, and blood used as leverage is still abuse. My mother got 7 years in federal prison. Isabella got 7 years as well, plus additional penalties tied to falsified brokerage disclosures. Their townhouse was sold. The vacation place in Sun Valley was sold. The family's name came off donor walls all over the city with astonishing speed. High society does not forgive scandal. It merely studies it for technique. Reporters shouted questions at me on the courthouse steps. Did I feel vindicated? Did I feel guilty? Did I think prison was too harsh for family? I told them the truth. I said I did not send my mother and sister to prison. Their choices did. I was just the first person in that family who stopped cleaning up the language around what they had done. Then I stepped away from the microphones because some endings are not improved by repetition. Emma was waiting under a black umbrella with Margaret, wearing the serious expression she gets when she senses adults are pretending everything is simple when it is not. She asked if it was over. I knelt so we were eye level and told her the part children deserve to hear in plain language. I said, "The lying part is over. The rebuilding part starts now." She considered that, then slipped her hand into mine and said, "Good. I like the rebuilding part better." So do I. In the months that followed, I did not become a saint, and I did not become the kind of billionaire magazines like to photograph beside glass staircases and words like resilience. I became busy. Grant Dynamics needed a real ethics policy, supplier transparency, labor audits, and a compliance team with actual teeth. I funded a pediatric emergency program in Seattle for families turned away or trapped between treatment and money, because no parent should ever have to hear the word deposit while holding a feverish child. I also quietly restarted a smaller version of what EcoNest had once been, not as a vanity brand, but as a line inside Grant's consumer logistics division built around honest sourcing and open contracts. Emma got her purple bedroom, just like the ones she used to draw on library paper and tape to the roof of our SUV. Some nights she still asks me if I remember the spaceship. I tell her I do, because forgetting would be another kind of betrayal. The strangest thing about revenge is that people think it is all fire. Sometimes the most satisfying part is the quiet after. The school pickup, the grocery run, the sound of your child sleeping in a warm room while the people who taught you fear no longer control the temperature of your life. If there is a lesson in what happened to me, it is not that money saves people. It does not. Money changes the scenery. Truth changes the structure. Another lesson is that family is not defined by who shares your last name. It is defined by who still shows up when loving you becomes inconvenient. And maybe the most important lesson of all is this: silence can feel noble when you are trying to keep the peace, but when silence protects cruelty, it stops being kindness and becomes permission. I learned that too late to save the life I had, but not too late to build a better one for my daughter. Today, Emma has a safe bed, a warm coat, and a mother who no longer mistakes endurance for surrender. That is the only inheritance I truly care about passing on.